Tonight, the latest on the arrest of Erin Patterson, now being questioned by police over the death of 3 people who ate her beef Wellington. Plus, the Beatles used controversial artificial intelligence to release their latest single, 43 years after the death of John Lennon. Also tonight, a High Court judge blames white supremacists for the massive rise in Jew hatred, blamed them 2 days before the Hamas attack. How can this judge and so many on the left be so blind to the danger of Islam and the left itself? In fact, I'll show you 2 men in Sydney today, not white supremacists, confronted after tearing down posters pleading for the release of Jewish people, even children taken hostage by the Hamas terrorist group. And I'll fact-check another lie from the Greens, that shameful political party's public comments effectively give cover to the world's worst terrorists. The Greens, the new nasty party. I hope I pronounced that right. But first, is the Albanese government actually now falling apart? Has the Prime Minister lost control after his humiliating loss over The Voice? Because today, Treasurer Jim Chalmers made his big Kevin Rudd statement, a real look at me, committing the government to his great global warming crusade, changing the entire way that we power this economy.
I really believe that the net zero transformation will be the defining piece of the defining decade. And whether we succeed or fail in these turbulent 20s will in large part be determined by how we maximise our advantages and leverage our strengths when it comes to energy in our economy.
It seems to me Chalmers is auditioning to be Labor's next Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd. In fact, copying Rudd.
Climate change is the great moral challenge of our generation.
That's sure arrogance. I mean, Chalmers is speaking outside his portfolio in a way that suggests he wants to be the Prime Minister after Anthony Albanese. Maybe instead of Albanese. And that's because a commitment as big as that is properly made by the Prime Minister, especially when Chalmers in his big speech was committing the government to now double down on what's clearly a disaster. Its global warming push to make us get 82% of our electricity from renewables like wind and solar in just 7 years, and to build 40 big wind turbines every month until then. As I've told you for some time now, that switch is in huge strife. We've got huge delays, we've got huge cost overruns, we've got huge opposition now to wind farms, plus, of course, electricity shortages coming up. But Chalmers today said, well, let's just pour even more money into this, because he now admits, yes, it's true, Labor's energy transition is actually running short, as I've been saying.
Without more decisive action across all levels of government, working with investors and industry and communities, the energy transition could fall short of what the country needs.
But are you okay with that? I mean, government spending even more of your money on this net zero transition that will in fact not change the climate. Are you okay with paying more and more for your electricity when it's still running short anyway? But perhaps the really amazing thing about that speech today is that Chalmers seems to be a slow learner. I'm just asking myself, didn't he see Kevin Rudd's leadership destroyed by preaching how climate change was a great moral challenge and then backing off when voters went, no, not really? Didn't he see Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard's leadership also destroyed when she made a global warming promise too that she didn't keep?
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Didn't Chalmers then notice Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull? Also, he was getting sacked too by his own party after trying to push it to join the global warming cult. And surely Chalmers knows that Anthony Albanese now is getting smashed for making his own global warming promise that neither Albanese nor Chalmers can deliver.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
I mean, getting on the global warming bandwagon is deadly for political leaders, yet there's Chalmers again promising even more of what's failing and what the public is now rejecting. Now, last night I missed something when I told you about some of the many people's revolts now against wind farms, like the one near Newcastle, protesters against a huge wind farm off the coast. In Wollongong, rallies last weekend against an offshore wind farm there too. In Tasmania, a successful campaign against a wind farm near the beautiful outcrop called the Nut, and so on. Now, it stuns me that Chalmers, with all these protesters, plus more that I listed last night, today says, well, let's go and even harder and faster. And particularly when these protests are only going to get worse. Because the thing that I missed, for instance, is our biggest offshore wind farm, planned at least, just needing the government's approval. This will have 200 giant wind turbines, more than 1/4 kilometre high, spread 1 to 2 kilometres apart, just off the coast, over a huge area off Western Australia, Geograph Bay, which is actually famous for its whales. In fact, the Sydney Morning Herald last year said researchers think there is an increase in females returning to what might have been historical calving grounds, pre-whaling, in places like this same Geograph Bay. So how long will those whales keep coming back when the pile driving starts to build these turbines? And why aren't green groups so keen on Save the Whale paying attention yet? In fact, I'm predicting another revolt against that wind farm too. Plus many others that will be forced on us, with Chalmers insisting on more and faster, telling us this is the defining piece in this defining decades, says this dividing treasurer. I wonder whether Albanese is really on board with all this, or are his ministers now just brushing him aside as a man broken by the defeat of the voice? And the way Chalmers spoke today, I'd be worried if I were Albanese. Now to an arrest today, one of our greatest real-life detective mysteries. Victoria Police arrested this woman, Erin Patterson, over the deaths of 3 people who ate her beef Wellington in July. And it's allegedly poisonous mushrooms too. The dead are the parents of her estranged husband and also her mother-in-law's sister, whose husband is the only survivor and just. The lead detective today pleaded for respect for their relatives.
I cannot think of another investigation that has generated this level of media and public interest, not only here in Victoria, but also nationally and internationally. I think it's particularly important that we keep in mind that at the heart of this, 3 people have lost their lives.
Joining me from Wonthaggi, Victoria, to give us an update on what's happening there is Sky News reporter Georgia Simpson. Georgia, thanks for coming on. Look, has Erin Patterson yet been charged with anything?
At this stage, no charges have been laid, Andrew. She was arrested at her home in Leongatha early this morning. Police spent 6 hours searching her property before they brought her into the Wonthaggi police station behind me for questioning, and that questioning is still underway.
I should say she's innocent. She says she's innocent, rather, of any wrongdoing. Do we know what led to this arrest now, 3 months later?
Not at this stage, Andrew. Police are remaining very tight-lipped as to what they're looking for or what they have potentially found. We do know today that police confirmed they had the assistance of AFP technology detector togs while they were searching her property. They also said earlier on, when this all first happened, that Erin Patterson was a suspect because she was the one that cooked the lunch that had the death cap mushrooms in it, which resulted in the deaths of 3 people, 2 of which are her ex-husband's parents, so her former parents-in-law.
And what's happening right now?
Well, she's still behind me. She's still inside the Wonthaggi police station behind me, rather undergoing this questioning by police. We don't know how long that could take. Police did say it could take several hours. She's been questioned now for more than 3 hours, so it certainly is a lengthy process. She may not be charged and she could walk free, but if she is charged, we do know as well that she actually won't be staying here tonight. Apparently the police cells or the holding cells at the Wonthaggi police station aren't equipped to hold people overnight. So regardless of the outcome, Andrew, she will be leaving at some point and going somewhere at some point. As for when or where that could be, it's still a bit of a mystery.
Georgia Simpson, you've got a long day or night still ahead of you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that. And just to repeat, Erin Patterson has not been charged with anything yet and has always denied wrongdoing. But back to the Treasurer's big speech today. I mean, talk about mixed messages. And that was perfectly captured by the homepage of Apple News today. Top story, Anthony Albanese telling one conference that cost of living relief is his top priority. But Treasurer Jim Chalmers telling another conference he wants more government intervention to hit the government's climate targets, which, as you know, is costing us so much. Joining me from London, where it's been at the big Conservative conference I've been covering all this week, is Barnaby Joyce, former Nationals MP and former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, great to see you. Jim Chalmers today saying the net zero transformation, getting rid of coal-fired electricity, is going to be the defining piece of the defining decade. What do you think it's up to?
I think it's going to be very defining for the Labor Party. It's very defining even right now. The power prices are going through the roof, liabilities going through the floor. They're overseas companies, so your money's heading overseas. If they are worried about the cost of living, then the current trajectory they're on is one that's going to remove any hope of manufacturing in Australia. It means that those who are the most vulnerable, the poor, are going to become poorer. It means the prospects of our nation being able to deal with what is coming down you can see over here, what's very, very clear is the world is changing. The economics of the world is changing. And we are going to be so vulnerable if we don't have a reality check and realise that we have to provide cheap energy. And what Mr. Chalmers and Mr. Bowen are doing, it's just like that they're completely denying the economic reality of the world they're creating. It's a disaster.
Well, I think they're denying two things, aren't they, Barnaby? I mean, you've got first the government doubling down on green energy while saying we're going to cut the cost of living. I think there's a real tension there that they're ignoring because bills are increasing and obviously the tax subsidies and whatever and the grants, they're increasing. But on the other hand, they're ignoring what seems to me a real revolt in country Australia, including in a marginal Labor seats off the Hunter, for instance, the Hunter Valley, against wind farms. And here's Chalmers saying he wants more and faster.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were going to swap to Chalmers. They don't realise what they're doing to their own electoral chances. Whether it's Patterson, whether it's Hunter, whether it's Whitlam, whether it's Gilmore, whether it's DeBell, whether it's Eden Monero. These are Labor seats along the coast. And I tell you, these people are massively unhappy. I've got one on Facebook. There's literally thousands of people there saying, bugger off, Bowen, the wind farms are going. Now, I don't think that's the sort of people who are going to vote for you, Minister Bowen. Or, by the way, Mr. Albanese, or, by the way, Treasurer Chalmers. And in our area, we're being dispossessed of our lands, transmission lines running all over it, the whole place becoming an industrial filth. These are not wind farms. Farms grow potatoes, they grow sheep, they grow cattle, they grow carrots. These are imported from China and basically deliver inefficient power. That's what they are. They are wind factories, not wind farms. And this is the new movement. It's happening across the world. And people are getting very, very angry with the idealism completely swamping out their premier rights of private property and their premier rights of cheap power.
I think wind factories is more accurate than wind farms. Barnaby Joyce, I've been stunned by the Albanese government throwing Israel under the bus again and again. It's war against Hamas, the terrorist group that actually runs Gaza. Now, Foreign Minister Penny Wong, I think, is now the worst, and she was at it again today. Here she is.
I again reiterate Australia's call for humanitarian pauses on hostilities. The international community will not accept ongoing civilian deaths.
Now, Barnaby Joyce, a pause now in the fighting with Israeli troops in Gaza exposed out there in Hamas territory means that Israel stops shooting, but Hamas clearly won't. They'll just use the pause to regroup and kill more Israeli soldiers. And Wong also saying no more civilian deaths means that Israel cannot fight Hamas at all because Hamas uses civilians very deliberately as human shields. So how do you see the government's handling of all this?
Well, over this conference, Anne Hirsi-Ali, I mean, she was really cuts through and basically says, you've got to understand, Hamas does not respect human life. It is a terrorist organisation. It doesn't respect the rights, as we see it, of women. The equality. It's quite happy to position themselves in such a form as to make hospitals targets, to use human shields. And when you start saying, well, we want you all to settle down, well, Hamas started this. Just let's be unequivocal of that. And, they could show goodwill by releasing the hostages. But you've got no hope of having any sort of reign on Hamas whatsoever. So this is just a rhetorical flourish. We want you all to settle down. They're a terrorist organisation. Terrorist organisations don't work like that.
Absolutely. If Hamas wanted the war to end, it could surrender. How about that? How about unconditional surrender? We agree to leave, says Hamas, like the PLO did when they were in Lebanon. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, more disgraceful scenes of anti-Jewish hatred. And I've got to ask why a High Court judge is blaming white supremacists for this epidemic of anti-Semitism. I mean, she blamed it 2 days before we saw where the real anti-Semitism was coming from. You've got to look left and left again. A special panel on that and the Greens. On the Greens, how did it become the nasty party? And again, I've got to ask myself, did I pronounce that right? Nasty. The hatred of Jews now is just so shocking. I mean, the mask is off. Today at Bondi Beach, there was a quiet protest with all the approvals by Jewish protesters and their supporters for the 250 Jewish hostages that the Hamas terrorists have held now for more than 3 weeks. For each hostage, there was a towel, thongs and a poster, but 2 men couldn't even stand looking at that and started to rip down even this memorial, like it was wrong to want their release.
The hostages aren't here, mate. They're not here. So why are we bringing them up? They're not your family.
What are you here for?
Because we don't need to bring this violence here. Why?
Yeah, but you are. You bring your posters and your flags and everything.
What scum? Joining me are 2 former Labor politicians, both Jewish, Michael Danby, who was in federal parliament, and Phil Dalidakis, a former Trade and Small Business Minister in Victoria. But Michael Danby, what does that incident tell you?
It just shows you that the Hamas supporters in Sydney are out of control. Ever since the coppers failed to arrest anyone following that gas the Jews, kill the Jews rally at Sydney Opera House. The New South Wales and Victorian police need to show the powers of the state to these people, not because that ripping down of posters was so serious, because by their inaction, the police's inaction, we are empowering these people, and something worse might happen if the coppers don't step up. Stop being woke and tell these people so far and no further.
And Phil, I know the last time we spoke to each other, you were wearing the Star of David out and proud. You're defiant. A lot of other Jewish people are saying, "Well, look, we don't dare have our kids walk in the streets in their school uniforms for a Jewish school." This is unprecedented in this country, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it is unprecedented. It is a massive concern because when levels of intolerance reach the stages where parents and schools are worried about kids being identified in their school uniforms or by using school bags with their symbols on them, then I think we need to take a good hard look at exactly where we're at as a community and a society. But also, as Michael said, the idea of policing fundamentally needs to be reviewed very, very quickly.
Now, I've been warning Jewish communities for 30 years now in speeches to various groups. So the next big threat would not come from the right, but from the left, and to be blunt, from some in the fast-growing Muslim community. So I was stunned today to see that High Court Judge Jane Jago still doesn't get it. She gave a Sir Zelman Cowen lecture 2 days before the Hamas attack on Israel, warning, yes, of more anti-Semitism, she got that right, but repeatedly blamed white supremacists, well, like neo-Nazis. She only mentioned the left, progressive, she called them, once in passing, and only once mentioned Muslims, but only as the victims of prejudice, not as the perpetrators of it. Michael Danby, what is this blindness on the left to the anti-Semitism of the left?
Well, our esteemed judge has the excuse that her speech was given before the depravity of Hamas was exhibited on the 7th of October. But even then, serious people from all the security services all around the world know that a lot of this crazed jihadist anti-Jewish violence is coming from that extreme Middle Eastern element. Now, there are many good Muslim people in Australia, and we shouldn't denigrate them, but we should act very hardly in Australia's interests against the extremists. And it's up to judges to frame that kind of understanding in the public, as well as magistrates and the police and political leaders.
Look, I'll give you an example of this hostility to Israel, Phil, from the Greens, for instance. Now, that is a party of the left. 2 days ago, Israel bombed a Hamas base in northern Gaza. It killed the top Hamas commander, and Israel says dozens of his terrorists were killed as well. This base was in what Hamas still calls a refugee camp. It, in fact, is more like a suburb now of Gaza, people not living in tents but high-rise buildings. Here's how one Green Senator, David Shoebridge, today framed that attack.
These have been very clear intentional acts from the IDF. We saw in just the last few short days the intentional targeting of a refugee camp where civilians, the majority women and children, were killed in order for the IDF to kill one identified target.
So saying the majority were women and children killed, he was saying one terrorist, the IDF went after one terrorist and killed 200 civilians. I don't know where he gets his figures from. I suppose it's Hamas. Your response to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's arrant nonsense coming from Senator Shoebridge. He should really know better. People in public office have a responsibility when they speak openly to the public to actually speak in facts. And quoting figures from Hamas would be like me asking the inmates of a prison how they're being treated. It's just rubbish. And to make matters worse, Senator Shoebridge and his colleagues have been shown to have a bias when they are only interested in Arab Muslim deaths when there is a conflict with Israelis and Jews, as distinct from where is Senator Shoebridge's comments about the nearly 500,000 deaths in Yemen or the over 500,000 deaths in Syria. I mean, you know, it's one thing to hold Israel to account, and they should be held to account for what they do. But it's another thing to actually go after Israel for defending themselves against, as Michael said, a depraved opponent that has acted with barbarity. And also, again, just to remind people, they broke the ceasefire when they invaded Israel with 2,500 of their most senior fighters and their brigades back on the 7th of October. Correct. So they need to go back to first
I don't
principles.
recall, it's true, I don't recall the Greens, I might be wrong, but I don't recall them complaining about any Muslims who've been killed that weren't killed by Jews. Not once. I don't recall it.
Well, let me also...
Michael, I don't think...
Andrew...
No, hey, I just want to ask Michael this before I run out of time, because I want to show people something very important. I don't think politicians, many of them, or many journalists who are making out that the problem here is Israel being too aggressive, I don't think they're actually following what Hamas is saying in Arabic about what it really wants. I've shown a couple of grabs this week that I hope have taken the scales from people's eyes. One senior leader now has just made it very clear that the plan is to hit Israel with 1 million slaughters like the one on October 7. Here he is.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها. إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة. هي إسرائيل مش إحنا ضحية الاحتلال. نقطة وآخر السطر. لذلك ما حدا يلومنا. إحنا شو اللي بنعمله. في 7 أكتوبر، في 10 أكتوبر، في مليون أكتوبر. إحنا اللي بنعمله مبرر. It is justified.
They want Israel destroyed. 1 million slaughters like the last one, the rapes, the beheadings, the this and the that, are just excruciating. Families burned alive. Michael, what's your conclusion?
There'd be no ceasefire if we were fighting Japan or even Daesh. And why should the Israelis give that man time to regroup? And the problem you identified of the Green Party, Andrew, is wider. They have voted against, since September the 11th, every piece of security legislation that would protect Australian citizens. So their contempt for Israelis, their support for Hamas is mirrored in their contempt for Australians and our safety. So young people, the Green Party is not about koalas, they're about apologists for rapists and kidnappers and murderers and lunatic medievalists like that Hamas man you just saw.
It is just extraordinary. I'm sorry, I'm run out of time. Michael Danby and Phil Dalidakis, but I've got to say, Labor's handling of this is also woeful. You both have said no ceasefire. Penny Wong is calling for a pause in the fighting now. So is Anthony Albanese, with his Israeli soldiers in Gaza exposed. What foolishness from the Labor Party there. Thank you so much to you both. Really appreciate it. After the break, 1 year to go in the US election. A former campaigner for Donald Trump tells us why the money now is on Trump to become president again and how it's changed from last time. In 1 year from now, from this Sunday to be exact, Americans will go to the elections to choose the new president. And incredibly, it looks at this stage like being a contest between the same guys from last time. US President Joe Biden, now looking much older than his 80 years, and former US President Donald Trump, facing numerous court cases for alleged fraud and alleged attempt to steal the last election. Joining me is Rick Gates, who was deputy chair of Donald Trump's first and successful campaign to become president. Rick Gates, thank you so much for joining me. Is this really going to be the choice again for the world's most powerful country with just a year to go? I mean, the options are running out. Does it look like Trump versus Biden?
Andrew, it's great to be with you again. Yes, as of now, it looks like we will have a Donald Trump-Joe Biden rematch in 2024. There are a number of pieces that are moving both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. The first major candidate in the Republican primary, Mike Pence, former vice president, has dropped out. We're also seeing nationally that Nikki Haley is starting to climb the ladder a bit and actually has surpassed Ron DeSantis in a number of key states. So she will be very interesting to watch. But it is clear on the Republican side right now that it is definitely Donald Trump and then a race for second, third, fourth place. And as we start moving closer to the primaries, we will see how that changes in the dynamic of the state by state politics. The Republicans have one more debate on November 8th. That'll be the last real opportunity that they can attempt to distinguish themselves from one another. I don't see any major surprises as of now. Most of the issues on the Republican side are still pretty clear. Economy and immigration are the two most important. On the Democratic side, there's been some very interesting developments. We have Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, that has been creating a shadow campaign just in case something happens to Joe Biden. But I think it's very important for people to understand this is not by accident. He definitely has the support of some very high-profile Democrats and the Democratic Party behind him. But he is not going to go out and say that he is running, to contest Joe Biden. He will wait to see if something happens to Joe Biden. Two other quick developments I think are very important. Over the weekend, Congressman Dean Phillips, he's a Democratic congressman from Minnesota, has actually filed paperwork to run against Joe Biden. And I don't think that'll amount to much, but it is clear that there are people in the Democratic Party that are very upset about Biden being the potential nominee. And then, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. Is running as an independent, and that will certainly hurt Biden in the general election. It shouldn't hurt him very much in the primaries. So at this stage, yes, we have a Donald Trump-Joe Biden rematch.
Yes, America does not have preferential voting, so Robert Kennedy Jr. taking those votes away from Joe Biden, they don't come back to him, that's going to hurt him. Now, you keep saying something will happen to Joe Biden. Well, there's something that people have been hoping for on the Democrat side is that he just quit. He should realise he's too old, he's too unpopular. He can't possibly be president for another 4 years, the way he's deteriorating, but he still won't do it. And there's now only 1 year to go. There's almost no time, reasonable time for someone else to take over. Are there still pressures on him to make way for someone like there were a couple of months ago?
Yes, the pressures are still very much real and they exist. There's two kind of dynamics happening. First of all, there's no president in the history of our country that has won with an approval rating of less than 40%. Joe Biden is hovering right at 38, 39%. So that is a key consideration that the Democrats are very much watching. And then when you say nothing has really happened, that's where I think you watch Gavin Newsom. Again, he is definitely has created a shadow campaign. He was in China last week meeting with President Xi and others. That is not by accident. There is definitely a movement within the Democratic Party to put in a potential placeholder. I suspect that Gavin Newsom will start filing paperwork just in case. And then the real issue is Hunter Biden. There is a lot of discussion that given the weight of evidence, both against Hunter and Joe's brother, Jim Biden, that there may be some deal struck behind the scenes that takes Joe Biden out of it in return for not prosecuting his son or his brother. We'll have to see how that develops, but that is becoming a real discussion in Washington.
Well, how dirty is that, a deal like that? So I thought justice was blind, but apparently not when it comes to politics. What are the polls actually saying? If it does turn out to be, as is currently looking the most likely option, Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, who would win?
Yeah, right now, most of the polls show Donald Trump winning anywhere from 2 to 8 points. There are a number of dynamics on the side of Donald Trump, though. He's obviously embroiled in a number of legal issues. There is some very interesting polling within the Republican voters that if Donald Trump is convicted before the election, he will start seeing a dip in those numbers and support from Republican voters. If those legal cases are delayed, which is obviously the strategy to push those off until after the election, then he is fine. He will continue to surge in those polls. So I think it'll be interesting to again. I feel like we're in the Fast and the Furious movie franchise, and we're about the third movie in, and so we've got obviously a number of potential stunts and other high daring tricks that will happen in politics. But the investigation on Hunter is important because it is leading to an impeachment hearing on Biden, and that presents both risks and rewards to the Republican Party if they move forward with that impeachment inquiry.
Rick Gates, 8 years ago, you were there starting to sell Donald Trump as president in a campaign that was successful. The Donald Trump that you knew then, you were trying to sell America then, and the Donald Trump today, who's running again, what is the difference?
It's a great question, Andrew, and there's not much difference. He's still the same person that he is. And that was probably one of the most asked questions. What is Donald Trump like behind the scenes? There is no difference between behind the scenes and in front of public view. What you see is what you get. I think the major difference is that he has 4 years of being president under his belt. So I think if he's elected, you're going to see a much different President Donald Trump as a legislator, as somebody that navigates, what everybody has called the swamp of Washington, D.C. And I certainly think that he will attempt to bring justice, within the United States government for a lot of the problems that he saw during his first term. That is probably going to be the major difference if he is successful in his reelection.
Rick Gates, always terrific to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Since we spoke to our reporter in Wonthaggi, police have now charged Erin Patterson with 3 counts of murder, 5 of attempted murder, all apparently, according to the police statement, relating to this one incident in July where she fed 4 guests a meal of beef Wellington with mushrooms in it. There are reports that 3 of the charges relate to separate incidents in the couple of years before that, but that's what the police say, this one incident. So we'll see what the truth is after that. Very, very intriguing. But to some happier news, or is it? Top experts on artificial intelligence are meeting in London today to discuss how to stop artificial intelligence from wiping out humanity. I mean, you just think of robots who've got suddenly a will of their own and no longer want to be the slaves of humans. But let's not worry about that. Let's think of how much fun we'll have in the meantime with this artificial intelligence, because there's now great news for fans of the Beatles, probably the most influential pop group ever. Tomorrow, the band is going to release its last song. It's called Now and Then, release it 43 years after John Lennon was murdered. And this recording is one of the gifts of artificial intelligence. Now, Lennon had actually been working on this song, recording himself singing and playing on the piano, and after his death, his widow, Yoko Ono, told drummer Ringo Starr she'd found the tape.
I was talking to Yoko and she said, I think I've got a tape of John.
Paul called me up and said he'd like to work on Now and Then. He put the bass on, I put the drums on.
Now, the three surviving Beatles back then did try, this is a quarter of a century ago now, to record the song by playing along with John's voice and piano, but it just didn't work. The technology then couldn't separate his voice from the piano, which was too loud, and the sound, by the way, from the cassette was pretty lousy anyway. But then film director Peter Jackson made a documentary on the Beatles using AI, and now that same technology was used to separate Lennon's voice and recreate it in a way to sound like this.
We were able to take John's voice and get it pure through this AI, so that then we could mix the record as you would normally do.
I was hoping we'd hear the song. Anyway, George Harrison has since died, of course, but a Harrison-like guitar contribution has now been added to the track, and tomorrow you're going to hear the result. Now, is this wrong or is this artificial? Well, McCartney says forget about all that.
There's John in his apartment in New York City, banging away at his piano, doing a little demo. Is it something we shouldn't do? Every time I thought like that, I thought, wait a minute. Let's say I had a chance to ask John, hey, John, would you like us to finish this last song of yours? I'm telling you, I know the answer would have been, yeah, he would have loved that.
Joining me is Trevor Long, a technology commentator who hosts two popular podcasts, the FTM and Two Blokes Talking Tech. Trevor Long, great to talk to you again. Have you got any problem with this use of AI? I mean, will this really be Lennon's voice?
Good evening, Andrew. I have no problem with this one, and I think the reason why is I need to differentiate the types of AI. So the AI I think we've heard a lot about this year is what we call generative AI, where I can type a question and get a reasoned response from a computer. The type where a face can be generated as if it's talking. The type where a person's voice can be cloned and used artificially by typing words. This is slightly different in that the AI here is really the intelligence of the computer to listen to that demo tape that John Lennon recorded and actually work out where's the piano, where's John, clean it up. It's possible now, if you've recorded a piece of audio just on your phone and it was in a busy room with someone talking, it's possible to send that to a website on the internet and it will clean it up like it was a studio-based interview. That's the kind of AI that's being used here. So the voice we hear, well, I'll probably get up at 1 a.m. to listen to this song, to be honest. I'm that excited about it. The voice we hear will be John Lennon's.
Meanwhile, though, all right, this bit's good. I'm with you on this one, Trevor. But meanwhile, other people, including Bill Gates and some of the top AI executives in the world, have issued a public warning saying mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority. Today, there's an international conference called by the British Prime Minister to discuss exactly that. It's got people like OpenAI's Sam Altman, Google DeepMind's Dennis Hassabis, the US Vice President Elon Musk and all that, who's saying, well, look, AI could be an existential danger and a threat to humanity. Do you agree?
Look, it is absolutely reasonable to suspect that AI could have the most malicious of intent if it's not built properly. But I'd give you the example of nuclear warheads. Does the United States still have nuclear warheads? Yes, because they can only control the free world, the allies. They can't control what other nations like North Korea or Iran may or may not have. So you've got to keep that in your arsenal. No government in the world is going to create a law that is global. And so even if the United States, Australia, the UK and a bunch of 50 other countries all say we need this to happen with AI, that doesn't change what happens in the other hundreds of countries. So unfortunately, we need to be aware of AI, and we're better off building AI defences to ensure that we can see it and detect it and hopefully prevent any misuse of AI.
Well, I hope that is possible, Trevor, because I'm seeing weird things, including footage of me interviewing Elon Musk, who I've never met, with AI dubbing my voice in my timbre. You can tell it's my voice, but saying things I'd never said. It's just really quite weird, and that's on the internet right now. Trevor Long, thank you so much indeed for your time. Got to go because we're going to cross to live news after this about the woman charged with 3 murders about her beef Wellington after this. Well, let's go back to Wonthaggi, Victoria, where reporter Georgia Simpson is with the latest breaking news about Erin Patterson, the 49-year-old woman just charged with 3 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder relating to a lunch in which she served beef Wellington with mushrooms and 3 people died, 1 nearly died. Georgia Simpson, the 5 counts of attempted murder are curious. Do they relate, as the police statement suggests, to this same dinner, or, as I've seen one news report say, 3 of the charges relate to earlier incidents?
Yeah, those 3 attempted murder charges relate to separate incidents in Victoria between 2021 and 2022. Police are alleging that a 48-year-old Currumborough man fell ill after eating meals on these 3 separate occasions. So that's what those 3 attempted murder charges relate to. There are, of course, 2 attempted murder charges and then the 3 murder charges that relate to that lunch that was hosted on July 29, in which we know that 3 people died after eating a beef Wellington, allegedly with death cap mushrooms. They died in hospital, and a 4th person spent almost 2 months recovering in hospital. So, as you mentioned, Andrew, Erin Patterson has been charged with 3 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder. She's facing 8 charges in total. She was arrested earlier today at her home in Leongatha. Police spent 6 hours searching her property before she was brought here to the Wonthaggi police station, where she underwent more than 4 hours of police questioning. She will remain in police custody tonight before she fronts Morwell Court early tomorrow morning. Andrew.
Just one last thing, George, you may not have the answer to this. The alleged victim of the 3 charges last year and the year before of attempted murder, do we know who that was?
There are reports that point to this alleged victim being the ex-husband of Erin Patterson. So that's Simon Patterson. We do know, Andrew, that 2 of the people who died following that lunch on July 29 were the parents of Erin's ex-husband, Simon Patterson. So that are what reports are saying at the moment. Whether or not that's confirmed by police is another matter, but it's certainly a bizarre twist to this story.
It sure is. Georgia Simpson, thank you so much for jumping back in again. Appreciate that. And just to repeat again, she's been charged, but up to this point, she has said she's not guilty of any wrongdoing. Now, I'm stunned by how the governments of Australia and the US are pretending that the real concern these days is the hatred of Muslims, just as much as hatred of Jews, or even more. 2 days ago, the head of the FBI was clear. Jews are actually much more likely to get attacked now.
The Jewish community is targeted by terrorists really across the spectrum. Homegrown violent extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, both Sunni and Shia, domestic violent extremists, and in fact, our statistics would indicate that for a group that represents only about 2.4% of the American public, they account for something like 60% of all religious-based hate crimes.
Extraordinary. Joining me as Sky News presenter, James McPherson of The Late Debate here on Sky at 10 p.m. And Evelyn Ray, now a regular Sky News commentator. here and on our Sky News show, the new one, Sunday Showdown at 7 p.m. James, what is this game where you've got the Prime Minister today saying, oh, look, I'm very concerned about Islamophobia as well. What is that?
Well, Andrew, it's a very dangerous game, and it shows that in the last 22 years we haven't learned anything. In 2001, Mohammed Atta flew a 767 through the window of the World Trade Center yelling Allah Akbar, and we were all told, don't be Islamophobic. Well, in a subsequent interview, Michael Toohey, he was the man who checked Mohammed Atta onto his American Airlines flight. He said, when I checked this man on, I thought to myself, if ever I've seen a dangerous person, it's this man. But then he checked himself because he didn't want to be racist or Islamophobic. How different the world would be if he'd been less concerned about Islamophobia and a more little attuned to his own gut instinct. This is not only insulting to Jews, but it's dangerous for the Western world when we're seeing Jews attacked by people purporting to act in the name of Islam, but we're told, don't be afraid of Islam, you need to give it a free pass. It's wrong and it's dangerous.
Evelyn, it seems to be an element of both siderisms here, you know, each side as bad as each other. That's what I think is going on, relativising what's happened to the Jews, particularly on that attack on October 7, as somehow equivalent to what Israeli soldiers are doing to Palestinians.
Yeah, everyone's afraid of backing the wrong team because you have the left with their hot little finger on their well-worn cancel button ready to lynch anyone who missteps. And it's a real conundrum for politicians, especially for Albanese, who clearly likes the fence that he is sitting on. And I live by the saying that Satan owns the fence. And there certainly should be no fence sitting when it comes to the shedding of innocent blood.
Well, that's a very nice saying. I might have to pinch that from you. This whole ludicrous transgender movement, James, the sexual identity movement, has hit our hospitals now. Someone sent me the Western Health Hospital Network webpage. It's got a new policy for identifying patients. You know how they always ask you this and this and this and this before they do any procedure. They're not now going to ask you what gender you are, which seems really weird. It's not one of the 3 points of identity. So if someone is checking in for, say, a gynecological procedure, they can't even ask if they're a woman. What's going on here?
Andrew, this has really dangerous consequences. It would be funny if it wasn't so serious. Just a few months ago in your hometown of Melbourne, at the Royal Women's Hospital, a transgendered patient, a female transitioning to male, went in for a hysterectomy, and the doctors realised during the operation, too late, that this woman, purporting to be a man, was 4 months pregnant. The unborn child could not be saved. And you've got to bear in mind that the woman who went in for the hysterectomy, she was incensed that she had to have the hysterectomy in a women's hospital because she was identifying as a man. So you can imagine why the doctors were too afraid to ask if she was pregnant, let alone perform the normal checks. And so on the altar of transphobia, this 4-month-old unborn baby lost its life. When medical staff start to prioritise patients' feelings above biology, more damage is done than good. And so this is very dangerous, and we've all got an interest in health officials telling the truth rather than being concerned about people's feelings.
Evelyn, I thought gender was biological, not a feeling. And if you were going to hear that truth proclaimed anywhere, it would have been in a hospital, I would have thought, and now it's not. Is that a problem, as James suggests?
Oh, it's absolutely a problem. There's a quick solution for doctors, though. Gynecologists now just have to identify as proctologists and vice versa, just to, escape all the politically incorrect things. But like James said, it'd be funny if it wasn't so dangerous. It is a disaster waiting to happen. And I wonder how many cases of medical negligence we're going to have to witness and tolerate before we can have an honest conversation about everything, because none of the doctors believe any of this. It's pure virtue signaling. And the people that are going to suffer the most are the people who are sick and who actually need help.
And James, I've only got 10 seconds, but it seems to me it's more about bullying than actually insisting on a gender.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's living in fear, as Evelyn said, of being cancelled because they've said the wrong thing. And so we say things we don't believe because we're afraid of getting in trouble.
And I think we're being made to jump through hoops. It's a power play. James McPherson, Evelyn Ray, thank you both for your time. That's it from me. Coming up, Chris Kenny. Good night.